I started on Shrinking before Harrison Ford signed on to do the show. And so when he did come aboard, one of his first requests was to meet the production designer because he really builds his character through the environments that they inhabit.
Welcome to the Filmmaker Mixer Podcast, the podcast by filmmakers for filmmakers. Filmmaker Mixer is a creative hub where aspiring and established filmmakers come together to share experiences, insights, strategies, and inspiration.
Hello, everybody. This is the Filmmaker Mixer Podcast, and today we're joined by production designer Cabot McMullen. He's worked on projects like Shrinking and Rooster and a lot of terrific shows. So, Cabot, how's your day going? I know you've been busy lately.
Yes, doing well, thank you. I'm working currently on season 4 of Shrinking and about to jump into prep on season 2 of Rooster.
And you said you're at
Um,
the new Warner Brothers location there?
yeah, we're doing Rooster at the new Warner Ranch, which is 2 or 3 minutes from the main lot. But it's brand new facilities. They have, I think, like 16 new stages here.
Wow.
There's a big new sort of public creative building where they've got a commissary that feels like you're in an airport lounge. It's amazing. It's very stylish. Um, there's a couple shows that are in prep over here right now, but I think we're one of the first ones.
Nice.
And yeah, very excited to sort of break new ground over here.
For sure, for sure. Well, you started out in architecture, correct?
I did. I was very interested in sustainable architecture when I was in college years and did my undergrad in architecture, and then I got a graduate degree in industrial design. And my first job out of school was working for an architect designer named Vladimir Kagan, who's very renowned as a mid-century guy. He did a lot of the furnishings for the Gucci showrooms around the world with Tom Ford. He had kind of a renaissance when I was there.
Isn't he in
But I
the,
was,
he's a Hall of Fame architect? Am I getting that right?
yeah. He had a factory in Long Island City, New York, which is just over the Queensboro Bridge from Manhattan, and or 59th Street Bridge, as some people call it. And so we would manufacture furnishings in Long Island City, and then he had a showroom in Manhattan, and then he had other showrooms in like Dallas and LA and Chicago. And so for me, it was a great immersion right out of school into creating design for living, but also in a bespoke way. It taught me a lot about uh, how people live and what priorities are. And but it's funny because in later years, people ask me, do you prefer designing for architecture or for uh, entertainment? And I was like, well, I prefer fictional clients. So, but
Well,
um, but while I was in New York during that period, I was always drawn to kind of a desire to get involved in visual storytelling, and I ended up sharing a loft to live with a bunch of actors, theatrical actors at the time, and and they saw me drawing something one day on my drawing table, and they said, "Hey, you can draw, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "Well, we have a set that we need to do for this production at the Lee Strasberg Institute. Could you help us out?" So I was like, "Yeah, it sounds great. Let's get together on that." So I started designing theatrical sets way off Broadway, and then some of my work got noticed, and then I ended up doing a show at the Provincetown Playhouse in New York, an IR11 play called Veronica's Room, which got some really great press. And then someone contacted me, and I became an assistant on Broadway for the next 4 or 5 years, just learning the ropes. So I was able to transfer my training in architecture into um, a new discipline, but I had to learn the vocabulary. I didn't even know what a proscenium arch was when I first got started. So, but from there, the designer I was working with, he was very kind of cross-platform, and he did TV, Broadway, commercials. He did like pretty much everything, and so I got a really good sort of head start there in terms of um, you know, film versus live television versus uh, theatrical staging and New York versus LA, it's kind of like an environment where you just kind of meet people and bump into things and things happen there, I think in a much more accelerated way. So for me, one of my first TV jobs was SNL. I was there for season 10, and then I got kind of known as the multicam guy, and so then I did Spin City with Michael J. Fox and Gary Goldberg, and that's where I met Bill Lawrence. Bill was the co-creator of the show, and so when Bill came out to Los Angeles to do Scrubs, I got the call to come out and do it was only supposed to be 6 episodes, and that turned into 13, and then that turned into 22, and then it just kept going, and then so for 9 years we were together creating that show, and then he spun off all kinds of things after that, and which kind of brings me to today. I was just in a meeting with Bill about 2 hours ago.
Oh, how funny. Well,
Yeah.
what's the difference between designing for the theater versus designing for television? How does that differ?
Well, in theater, you have a very kind of confined box that you have to design into. The proscenium pretty much is your point of view and your lens, if you will. Um, and you also, I mean, it's kind of XYZ. You have depth, you have width, and you have height. Um, and so a lot of it is very abstracted, and um, things are there's a lot of cheats and visual tricks that you can pull off in theater with scrims and um, scale. You can do things at different scales. But it's interesting. I've been able to take a lot of what I learned in theater and have brought it into the camera world. For example, we just did a scene on Shrinking where Jimmy, played by Jason Segel, is doing a therapy session in his office, and we created a miniature 3D set of a house outside the window as a three-dimensional backing. And I totally did it as a theatrical cheat. And and so everybody looked at this thing and they were like, "Oh my God, how'd you come up with that?" And I was like, "Theater." It's just, right from the good old days of, putting something in front of an audience that that appears to be something other than what it is.
So is it like
So
a flat or a miniature, or how do describe that? What do you mean exactly?
okay, so if you imagine like the facade of a house,
Right.
which is probably 50, 60 feet by 40 feet or whatever, we shrunk this thing down to maybe 14 by 16.
Gotcha.
It was only about 12 inches deep, but it had various levels of detail on it. So there was like a gable and a porch, and the windows are cut out so you can light it up from behind for night scenes. So the one thing a backdrop can't do for you, a 2D backdrop, is give you shadows,
Right,
based on
right.
based on how the time of day is with how the DP lights it. So this kind of a set piece actually gives you shadows, and at night, you can put things in the windows. You can do shadow puppets in the windows if you wanted.
Well, I'm curious, when you're designing a show, what's your way in? What are you looking at in the script to figure out what the look should be? Is it psychology of character? Is it story? What's going through your head when you're figuring this out?
Yes, it's all of that. Really, what I strive to do is to tell you something about the characters that the script can't give you in words. And so,
Can you give me an
just
example? Do you have an example of that? That's interesting.
yeah, I mean, if you look around a room, many of the things in that room could be intentional choices. I'll give you an example. One of the references we used for shrinking early on was a book called 50 Shrinks. And it was a picture book that were photographs of therapists' offices. And some therapists will put a lot of personal things in their office to kind of tell you who they are and to make you feel comfortable and make you feel like you've got, a little bit of insight on who you're doing your therapy with. Others will intentionally misdirect and put things in the office that um, say nothing personal, but perhaps are put there to elicit a response from the patient,
Really?
so that the therapist can tell something about who they're dealing with. And um, and so in the case of Paul's office, who's played by Harrison Ford, um, we had, he's a man who's dealing with Parkinson's. And so we intentionally put pieces of furniture in the room where between therapy sessions, he could do physical activities like push-ups or stretches, things like that, because a person with Parkinson's, when they're sitting still for long periods of time, stiffen up and it becomes very uncomfortable. Um, we also put pictures on the wall that were images inspired by the works of Carl Jung, and um, and basically they're um, what might be described as tools because they're there to elicit kind of a glimpse into the subconscious. And so, things like that are in the room, um, tell you something about the character, but also tell you about, the story that you're in. And so I'm always looking for details like that with the decorator, but also in a much more sort of high altitude way, I'd look for some kind of visual metaphor.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, in the case of Rooster, which we're also talking about here today, the writers really wanted to communicate this idea of um, this sort of transgenerational conflict that's going on in educational universities and campuses today, where you've got like wokeism colliding up against MAGA, and it's the old and the new, um, and so I designed the campus sets to be one big part of it was neo-Gothic architecture, and then you've got this contemporary modern architecture slamming up against it. And so it all kind of comes together in the student union set or student center set in the show, where you've got this extreme contemporary piece of architecture that's been attached to the side of this uh, neo-Gothic building. And so one of the writers, well, it was Matt Tarsis, actually, the showrunner, came up to me and he said, "Hey, what do you call the style of that building?" And I said, "It's neo-Gothic." And so next week in the script, he had John C. McGinley say, "Oh, I really hate this building because they took a beautiful piece of neo-Gothic architecture and slapped a greenhouse on it." So, but that set was really the visual metaphor for the core thesis of the show, and so when I first read a script, I look for kind of hooks, like visual hooks like that, ways in where I can tell you something, about the story, about the characters in a visual way.
When you feel the emotional tone of a scene or a show, how do you use color and shape to accentuate the emotional tone of a show? I don't know if that question makes sense or not, but I'm just curious if you think of things like that as well.
Yes, that's all part of our journey, our exploration um, and I'll even take it a step further, somewhat. I mean, very often, particularly in features, we sometimes try to assign a color story to each character
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
that no matter where you are in the story, you know who you're with. Um, Particularly in television, I mean, it used to be much more of an issue when, people watch content with commercials because sometimes, you'd go away for a while, you'd come back. So I always wanted the audience to know where they were and who they were with, and sometimes color can be very useful for that. But in general, um, you know, again, going back to shrinking, the pilot in the first season was about Jason Segel's character Jimmy, who has been through a tragic loss of his wife, and he's not, dealing with it very well. He's letting himself go. He's neglecting his daughter and his family, and um, and so we purposefully painted a lot of his sets um, several shades darker than anywhere else in the show.
Oh, interesting.
And we kept all the drapes closed, and a lot of the plants were dying. And it even went a step further when uh, I was working with James, our director, on the first episode, James Ponsoldt. He had this brilliant idea. He said, the way I want to telegraph this visually through camera is whenever we shoot Jimmy at home, half of the frame is going to be empty because that's where his wife used to stand.
Oh, that's clever. That's
And
interesting.
so, yeah, and so there were a lot of kind of very strategic visual choices that were made, that might not have been obvious, but all that stuff kind of seeps into your subconscious as a viewer, and it resonates in a way that you can't do with script. So
Right,
that's kind of what we do as visual storytellers.
right, right. And speaking of camera, do you have to adjust the look? Well, do you have to make choices for camera? In other words, certain fabrics don't look the same way on camera as they do to the natural eye, or certain, wallpaper or textures or wood. Do you have to take all that into consideration? And if so, do you have to do camera tests on things or?
We do. We try to if there's enough time.
Yeah.
Um, I collaborate very closely with the costume designers, Alyssa Fanger on Shrinking and Heidi Higginbotham on Rooster. Our director of photography, uh, John Brawley, is brilliant. He's very collaborative, and we talk a lot about light, color, texture. Everybody's shooting on high def now, so you have to be mindful of that. And you can't really fake things as much as you used to be able to. So we tend to use a lot of real materials. Um, and then there's issues with frame rate and and how the digital camera sees things. And so if you have, for example, stripes on a shirt or on a piece of wallpaper that's, you know, a certain scale, it may moire on camera. So when the camera moves, you might get this sort of swirly thing going on, which is never very pleasing. Um, almost everything can be fixed in post now, but that can also be very expensive. So we try to do as much practically as we can.
And do you create designs so that the character can stand out more in a scene? In other words, would you design a look for a character that's in contrast with the set? Does that make sense? I mean, are you looking at things like that, or do you get that specific?
Yes, skin tone is a factor. We always try to look for as much contrast as we can between, who's playing in a scene and what their background is. That's where costumes comes in a big way. I never want to put um, a blue sofa in a scene where somebody's going to be wearing blue because
Right, right, right.
they'll end up being a talking head. Um, so there's a lot of discussion and collaboration. On a TV episodic schedule, we generally have um, meetings with the director first, and then we have what's called a concept meeting where all the department heads get together and we discuss things like this, like, oh, we know we're going to be in this set. What's the color story in there, and what are they going to be sitting on, or what are they walking against, and things like that. And then we'll talk with camera and electrics and work out, uh, lighting schemes and practical lights are also very important for a lot of reasons, day and night. Um, we just opened a big new restaurant set on Shrinking where even though we shoot day scenes in there, it can be quite dark. It's almost like a tavern. And so the practical lighting in there becomes very important.
And what kind of team are we talking about? How big is your team on something like this?
Well, typically I oversee several different subsets of my department. I oversee construction, set decoration, property, graphics. Um, I'm working very closely with locations, uh, transportation. I get involved with because we generally have to sometimes pick the vehicles and then put graphics on them. Um, grip and electric to some degree, camera, of course, and costumes. But my direct reports are set deck, construction, property, and graphics.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
it's probably a team of about, depending on we scale up and down with some groups, but on any given day I'm connecting with 50, 60 people. It's a
Sure.
lot.
What do you think the biggest challenge is for you when it comes to set design? Were you ever on a show where you had to come up with something really unusual or out of the box, or what kind of challenges do you typically face?
They vary. Depends on the genre. At this point, I've been doing this a long time. I've done pretty much every genre there is out there, and some of the more unusual sets I've had to do are probably in the superhero category. I did the uh, series Supergirl for CBS for Greg Berlanti, and the pilot for that was enormous. I think it was a 20-day shoot. It was huge by you know network TV standards, and I had to design a lot of crazy stuff, like Krypton and the DEO and spaceships and all that. And um, I did another series for Steven Spielberg called Extant with Halle Berry, also for CBS, and we had to design a orbiting space station.
Oh, wow.
And um, and we our goal there was to make it as realistic as possible. There were a lot of robotics on the show, and so I was working with or consulting with robotic engineers in London, and it was early days of Tesla, and so we got a bunch of their prototype cars to be on the show and collaborated with some of their robotic people. So that was challenging in a different way, you know, trying to create something that was very realistic, but also future centric. Um, but a lot of what we do is trying to create something really expansive, but with kind of a pattern budget. And um, more than ever, to keep shows in LA, budgets are a big concern for everybody.
Sure. Sure.
So that's a big part of the challenge, is trying to deliver on audience expectations, but on a studio budget.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, Cabot, before we let you go, tell us about this award. You were nominated recently. What, set decorator of America? What was the award?
Yes, the SDSA
Yeah,
Awards.
yeah.
It's the Set Decorators Society of America, and very proud and pleased to be recognized by our peers. And Andrea Fenton, who is our decorator on Shrinking, was nominated.
Nice.
It's a decor design award, so we're both nominated, but it's really her guild, and they're just a wonderful group that I collaborate very closely with and count on. They bring so much to the design of a show. It's hard to even give them adequate credit, but um, they tell you things about the character that are really key and essential to bringing them to life. Um, funny quick story. I started on Shrinking before Harrison Ford signed on to do the show, and so when he did come aboard, one of his first requests was to meet the production designer because he really um, builds his character through the environments that they inhabit,
Interesting.
and a lot of that is through set decoration. And so, to bring it back to this recognition that we just got, it's the layers. Basically, I'm the architect of the show, but the set decorators are really creating, much of the detail that brings the character to life. I mean, we collaborate very closely on it. and I get to choose everything that lands on the set. But without Andrea, I really couldn't do the show. So I'm very happy for her. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on that nomination, and yeah, stay in touch. I know you're busy, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat tonight. But circle back. We should talk again.
I would love that. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, buddy. You take care.
Good chatting. Okay, bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker Mixer Podcast, a podcast created and hosted by filmmakers Jeff Stolen and Andrew Lamping, and produced by Melody Lopez.
Our theme song was composed by Stephen D. Bennett.
Make sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on, and stay tuned for future episodes.